Welcome everyone to today's November Rec Release webinar. My name is Jenny and I'll be facilitating today's event. Today I'm joined by Holly and by Glenn, who will be presenting the event today. And just before we get started, we'll go through some housekeeping. So we ask that you keep your cameras and your microphones off. The event will be recorded, so if you miss anything, you will have the opportunity to refer back to the recording. And we will be using Slido today for our Q&A portion, and I will share the QR code for you shortly. And there'll also be opportunities to ask questions throughout the meeting and at the end. So if you have any questions, just type it into Slido. So that's the QR code that you guys want to scan your phones. I'll just leave that there for a moment. And I'll also put the code number in the chat if anyone misses this. In the meantime, I will hand off to Holly. This is the agenda for today. And I'll pass over to Holly.
Jenny. As Jenny mentioned, there will be a opportunity to ask questions at the end of each portion. So don't wait till the end to ask your question. If you've got a question, there will be an opportunity to ask those questions. So the first thing I wanted to talk to you about was a potential extraordinary release for September. So this is the 29th of September as an extraordinary rec release. This hasn't been approved as of yet, but this is targeting that extraordinary release in September. And this is R0078. So this is EMR Settlement Limited, additional access to EES. So Electricity Market Reform Settlement, EMRS, are experiencing an increasing occurrence of domestic consumers being included in capacity provider portfolios. So at the moment, they have limited availability to data on these domestic customers, which means that it's making the completion of assessments and checks quite difficult. Access to data held in the EES for domestic metering points will enable EMRS to complete these tasks that are required to appropriately include domestic provider contributions in the overall view of the capacity market. So this CP seeks to update the data access matrix by providing EMRS access to additional data items and removing a restriction on the measurement and the profile class that is currently in place. So it means that they'll have access to all sites and not just INC consumers. The proposer has requested this access to be in place in time for the start of the delivery year, which is the 1st of October 2023, which is why we're targeting a release date of the 29th of September. Parties impacted by this change will be the Electricity Inquiry Service Provider, and Electricity Market Reform Settlement. And the REC products impacted by this change are the Gas Inquiry Service Data Access Matrix. So that's the extraordinary release targeted for September. I am going to pause there and ask if there's any questions before I move on to the next section, which will be CPs included in the November 2023 release. Any questions, Jenny?
Not at the moment, so I'll move on for you.
So I'll move on to the November 2023 release and all the changes that are included. So at the moment, we've had 3 CPs which have been approved for November release, and then there's a further 3 that are targeting that November release as well. So I'll run through them, and again, if you have any questions, there'll be a chance at the end of this section to ask them. So if we can move on to the next slide. So the first one that has been agreed for the November release is R0017. And this is invalid request for site technical details. So distribution network operators, DNOs, have reported that they are receiving a high volume of requests for site technical details, which is then in turn resulting in an increase of workload. And it's not clear to them that the requests are necessary or valid. So this CP will provide clarity around when it is necessary for DNOs and metering equipment managers to request and send site technical details as part of a meter asset installation, switch or change of agent process. So the parties impacted by this change will be metering equipment managers, distribution network operators and energy suppliers. And the REC products impacted by this change will be Schedule 14, and that's metering operations. And as I've mentioned, this change will be implemented in full on the 3rd of November 2023. The next one is R0059, and this is maintenance of qualification schedule change. So REC service users are required to submit maintenance of qualification annual statements to the REC code manager. And the requirements of what needs to be submitted do differ dependent on the service user. So lack of clarity within the schedule is leading to either missing or partially completed submissions. So this change will make clearer what the obligations are for REC service users and therefore what they need to submit as part of that maintenance of qualification annual statement. Parties impacted by this change, so we have gas transporters, metering equipment managers, REC service users, energy suppliers, distribution network operators, switching data service providers, data collection company, and REC products impacted by this change. We have Schedule 1, interpretations and definitions, and we've got Schedule 9, which is qualification and maintenance. And this one has been approved to be implemented in full on the 3rd of November 2023. The next one that we've got is R0088, make shipper Nexa values available on the GES portal. So this change proposal seeks to deliver the consequential REC changes for the Uniform Network Code modification 0701, which is aligning capacity booking under the UNC and arrangements set out in the relevant nexus. The purpose of that modification was to improve visibility where a consumer has entered into a bilateral network exit agreement, which is an NEXA, with the relevant transporter, and to link capacity increase with the NEXA so that allowed capacity does not exceed the capacity as agreed within that NEXA. This change proposal will make the legal text changes to the gas data access matrix to support that UNC modification 0701 and the associated EXOSERV reference number XRN 5186. And this is to ensure that NEXA information is available within a UK Link major release and subsequently the Gas Inquiry Service GES portal. Parties impacted by this change are gas transporters, gas shippers, gas suppliers, and the only REC product impacted by this change will be the gas data access matrix. And this has also been approved to be implemented in full on the 3rd of November 2023.
So just before we move on, we have had a couple questions come in. So in regards to R88, somebody's asking, are there any gas GES API changes as a part of R88?
Hiya, I'm Elise Handy. I'm the change analyst on 88. So any API changes were not in scope of this change. However, I have had a conversation with EXOSERV about that. So if there is a need, if you want to reach out to me and we can discuss that in full, and that may end up being another change off the back of this one. So if you want to reach out, let me know.
Thank you, Elise. And there's a question for the change before, so R78. And the question is, in what ways is GES gas DAM impacted by R78 when it is around access to electricity?
Hi, it's Gemma Dixon. I'm the lead analyst on R78. The Gas Inquiry Service and therefore the gas dam isn't impacted by R78. Can you just flick back to the R78 slide, please, Jenny? Does it call it out on there?
Oh, I don't. Have we got there yet?
The
Yeah, we
first
have.
one.
It was the first one that we
Oh,
discussed,
gosh.
and I think it might just be a typo in there.
So, sorry, am I? That's where we are now.
Is the one under this the September changes, the extraordinary one?
The one under. Oh, right. Yeah, of course. Sorry about that.
Yeah, so under rec products there impacted by this change, it does say gas inquiry. It doesn't impact the gas inquiry service, to answer the question. It is EES, electricity.
Thank you. Just confirming.
Thank you for that. We will update it on there and get it sent out.
Fabulous.
So can I just interrupt there? Is that one that's not is that being approved yet, that R78?
Not yet. It's due for decision on the 15th of September by the technical expert panel.
So with this one then, if that's not approved, then this extraordinary release won't go ahead. Is that my understanding?
That's right, Holly. There's nothing else in that extraordinary release, is there? Just this one.
No, that's the only one that is targeted for the September release.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Just move back to where we were and move forward.
Thank you. So the next one is R0110, a reviewer supplier access to data on GES. So the GES allows users to access gas market data in accordance with the data access matrix. Currently, registered shippers have a community view by default in the DAM, whereby they can see their designated data items for every registrable metering point in the market. Data items exclusively available to registered shippers and therefore not registered gas suppliers include meter reading history and meter asset manager history. Currently, if a supplier wishes to access this information, they need to request this data from their shipper. So whilst many gas suppliers act as their own shipper and have more immediate access to this information, many registered gas suppliers do not. This change proposal seeks only to introduce data items that are available to the registered shipper, exclusive data items, registered gas supplier portfolio view as are needed for registered supplier processors. And this would enable registered gas suppliers to efficiently respond to consumer-facing switching and billing issues. Parties impacted by this change will be the gas inquiry service provider, and rec products impacted by this change are the gas data access matrix. And this is being targeted for an implementation date of the 3rd of November. R140. This is the November 2023 housekeeping change proposal. This housekeeping change proposal is subject to housekeeping change proposal process rather than the standard change process. And the nature of this change is that it makes non-material changes to rec products, and it's to do things like correct typographical inconsistency errors. It also provides an opportunity to introduce necessary clarifications. So there's a number of schedules that are going to be impacted by this. So Schedule 1, interpretations and definitions. So we're updating switching operating data to switching operation data to match the use of the term in Schedule 24. We've updated a definition for qualified and corrected a typo within there as well. Schedule 5, there's a number of changes within the change management schedule, specifically within paragraph 25, which talks about the housekeeping change proposal and the process. So we'll be adding links to defined terms in there and correcting a typo. Schedule 9, qualification and maintenance. We'll be removing 1.4 now that we have passed CSS Go Live and retail code consolidation, as it's no longer relevant. Schedule 27, RMP lifecycle, we're correcting a number of typos to paragraphs 3.1.7 and 3.1.13, and decapitalising the word isolated throughout the schedule as it's not a defined term. So rec products impacted by this change is schedules 1, 5, 9 and 27, and the implementation date is targeting the 3rd of November rec release as well, but hasn't been approved yet. There is one more change that's targeting November, but before we move on to that and hand over to Glenn, I just wanted to talk through the impact of the products. So Schedule 1, interpretations and definitions, is going to be impacted by R0059 and the housekeeping changes within R0140. Schedule 5, change management, is impacted by the housekeeping changes, R0140. Schedule 9, qualification and maintenance, so R0059 and R0140 will be impacting that particular schedule. Schedule 14, metering operations, is going to be impacted by R0017. Schedule 27, which is the RMP life cycle, is R0140, and gas data access matrix will be impacted by R088 and R0110. Thanks, Jenny.
Just before we move on, is there any further questions? I can see there's one in the chat in regards to confirming whether API will be adding these new data items. I'm assuming that's for R88.
I think that was already covered with the previous question, but I'm happy if they want to reach out to me as well to talk about that in more detail.
Sure. Okay. Well, in that case, I'll hand off to Glenn.
Thanks, Jenny. Good afternoon, everyone. So just wanted to talk to you today about some work we've been doing within the rec code manager on change, and specifically around what we've been doing, combining some change proposals to make it a bit more efficient. So we've been listening to what you've been saying out there, that the progression of change is quite slow sometimes, and there's been a lot of other ones that haven't been addressed and been sat for a fair while because they're low priority. So what we've been looking at is how we can move these through more quickly, and our 0138 is the first of the sort of CPs that brings some of these together more efficiently. So bringing 3 CPs under one umbrella, and these ones are were looked at as being simple housekeeping, almost housekeeping changes to the legal text without too much impact. So we've been looking at a number of CPs, 50 in total, that we can do in a similar way, or how we can move these forward, and sort of a really hot off the press, watch out for. We are happy to do a webinar early in October to take you through some of the new improvements to the change process that we've been working on for the last few months, and how the change process might change to make it more efficient and more user friendly. So heads up early on that one, but keep an eye out for anything further updates on that. So back to this change, really, we want to make sure that we take these, and even though we might progress them more quickly, we want to get impact assessment from parties, and we've been using the Rec Issues Group, the RIG, to do this. And this particular change went through to the RIG on the 11th of August for stakeholder review. I want to move on to the next slide.
Thank you, Glenn. Just before we do that, we got a question on Slido, and they're asking, how will REC be managing the end stages of the interim process for the SIP role code line in line with the November release?
I think that's one for us in the task force that we're looking at, the task force change proposals, but there might be someone else that's working on the SIP one that's online.
Steve here. I'm just interested in understand a little bit more about the question. So I don't know if the person who's asked it might be willing to.
Hi. Yes, it's just obviously we had as a DNO an option to use the new role code in the June release, or if we weren't able to implement the change, we were able to do so for November, but we had an interim process for the SIP to be able to contact us via a different means. So I'm wondering if there's sort of like an end staging for that process in line with the deadlines that we were given to institute the roll code.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and sorry, Glenn, for kind of jumping in when you're not quite talking about SIPs, but happy to answer the question. So I think there's a hard stop with interim process on the 3rd of November, and a number of parties have been moving towards the ability to send and receive flows in the interim. So our expectation is that from the 3rd of November, there should be no more use of that interim service. Everybody who's involved in the process should be able to be set up and using the market messages to communicate about those changes. There is always going to be a telephone contact needed for dangerous situations. We'd always said that all along, but pretty much everything else should be sent through market messages from that point onwards, if not before.
Okay, brilliant. No, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay, so yeah, going back to 138. So we've umbrellaed 3 CPs into this change. So the first one being R0058, which is a clarification around the provisional services to REC, and it's really so that position is clear between the DCC and RECO, and the legal review is just makes it clarifies this, and it makes no material impact. So we'll progress in that one under this change. If I'm skip 104 for a second to go to 129, clarifying the events of default. Again, this is just to make clarification and to the legal text that makes it clear that persistent non-payment consistence of invoicing actually constitutes an event of default. So that one's in the legal text as well. And going back to 104, this one was a clarification or designed as a clarification to something that's contained in the billings, the other schedules, the billing schedules that talk about when you can bill for an erroneous switch and when you can't. And this was meant as a clarification within the legal text. We have had in the last day something raised against this, so we are looking at it a bit again. So we may pull this from 138. And we may continue depending on where it sits when we finally make a decision on it. But that's the beauty at the moment of using this umbrella CP. We have for the 3, because we're testing this out as part of the new process, that we haven't withdrawn the original CPs until we know they're going to go through to decision. So it doesn't mean that we can take 104 out and then progress 104 separately on its own. So keep an eye out for that. We've got, I think, another 15 days or so before we have to pull 104 if we do. So keep an eye on it. But again, I won't read it all out, but it gives you the impacted parties for the changes and the products that are impacted by it as well. So the headline is "Watch out for a new way of working," and this is sort of the first one that you'll see. Oh, I can see Jackie's got a hand up. Am I? I'll take her question. We might have more on Slido that I haven't seen.
Hi, Glenn. Sorry to jump the queue of Slido. Just in respect of 104, are you able to share what the issue is that's being raised against it, or is that?
No, that's fine. I think we just want some clarification as to whether, because we're naming it as particularly billing, that then the RPA need to do any monitoring of it. I think our initial view is that it's outside of the scope and it's within the license, and Ofgem would do any monitoring of billing, but RPA want to be certain that they don't need to do anything, and if that was the case, they'd have to make changes to the park, which would be considerable.
Ideal. Thank you for that.
Sorry, there's another question on Slido before we move on. It says, has this new approach to change and umbrella changes been consulted on?
No, that's what we're going to talk to people. We have talked to some individuals to get a feel for it, but we will be bringing it to the wider industry in early October. This is just there's nothing that prevents us from doing this today. We wanted to experiment and see if this works. I don't think we've had anyone push back on it, but we haven't consulted on it because we haven't brought it formally to parties yet. But watch out for in October.
And I think there's another question from Amy.
Yeah, hi. So with this umbrella kind of combined changes process that you're looking to move forward, is this to help combat where a rec change is raised to change a previous rec change? So if we look at SIP as an example, RO 101 was brought in to rectify any changes of RO 21 and potentially push back the date. Is this to stop that from happening, or to almost combine those changes rather than having two separate rec mods that are going through?
So it isn't specifically designed to do that. I think this is probably where we can see that non-controversial CPs that have been raised at the moment fit together and we know can be more efficiently dealt with. So we, instead of having to do 3 lots of change reports and all the work that goes alongside that, we can combine it into one and make it much more efficient. And also that means that we can push through ones that are low, that end up with a low score when they go through the prioritisation matrix.
Okay.
We can combine them. I don't want to preempt too much about what we want to do with the changes going forward at this stage, but in the future, we may not need to do it if we adopt the new ways of working, which would make it much more simpler to us than to stop CPs that maybe shouldn't have got into the process in the first place. So avoiding that duplication or that excess effort that's not needed.
Yeah, because I think it's definitely a bugbear of ours in regards to multiple rec changes being raised for the same reason, but just to almost change some of the wording or change the date that it's due to be released. It does cause that confusion and that frustration from our side of things. So if this does work and it is something that we push forward, it would definitely help with those situations as well. Yeah,
the other one that's coming down the line that we've done is with the second number. So we've got the second umbrella CP that's in the process, and those of you that have been to the rec issues groups recently will have seen that one consulted on as well. Is under STEP, where we had 7 or 8 changes to STEP. So we've looked at them and said actually need 2 CPs to put all this into action. So rather than you having to look at 8 CPs, potentially it's only 2. So that's exactly what I think what you're saying is that makes it more efficient. What we can't do, well, the new change process will help, but what we can't do with this one is where something was missed in an original CP and we have to go back and correct it. That's unfortunately happened a couple of times recently, but we're looking to address that under the new process that we're putting in place.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think there are any other questions, so I'll move on to the next slide.
Thank you. So I'm just going to cover some changes for a December 2023 extraordinary release, which is R0067 and R0128, one of which has been approved, and we're waiting for the other one to be approved. So if you want to go on to the next slide, Jenny. So R0067, this is an introduction of CSS refresh functionality. So CSS market messages sent by the central switching service to the switching data service providers are either not being received, they're being received after gate closure, or they're being received out of the order that they were originally sent in. So this CP seeks to introduce a refresh and resend functionality to mitigate these issues for SDSPs. However, it is being tested initially for the gas retail data agent as the impacts are most prominent within its service. And then once delivered, the refresh and resend functionality will be available for other SDSPs who may wish to connect their systems. The resend or refresh messages to be included in the solution for this CP are registration secured active synchronization will have a resend functionality. Registration cancelled synchronization will have a resend functionality. And registration event synchronization will have a refresh functionality. Parties impacted by this change gas retail data agent, gas shippers, and the central switching service provider. And the REC products impacted by this change will be Schedule 1, so interpretations and definitions, Schedule 24, switching data management, Schedule 27, RMP lifecycle, and this change has been approved to be implemented in full on the 6th of December as an extraordinary REC release. And then 0128, so this is removal of CSS Business Rule 117 to reflect the one fail, all fail optionality. So this change looks to remove Business Rule 117 from the Central Switching Service Message Business Data Validation Rules. And that mandates that all suppliers have a one fail, all fail reference included in their switching operational data record in CSS. And that was not the intended design. The switching operator has scheduled an update to the functionality to meet the original design. On implementation of the system update, the REC data specification needs to reflect the updated functionality. And the parties impacted by that change are the REC code manager. Products impacted by the change is the data specification, CSS message business data validation rules. And this change is targeting an extraordinary REC release on the 6th of December. Before I move on to post-implementation support, have we had any questions come through, Jenny, on those last two for the 6th of December?
No questions so far.
Great. So post-implementation support, if you move on to the next slide, please, Jenny. So if you do need any support relating to this release, you can raise a service desk inquiry or email inquiries@recmanager.co.uk, or you can contact your operational account manager. If your inquiries relating to a technical issue with the gas inquiry service portal, you can contact ExoServe. If your inquiry is relating to a technical issue within the electricity inquiry service portal, the email is there for you to email them. And using the switching management system to get help and support with any technical queries about switching. The ServiceNow link is there as well, and we will be publishing this documentation to the portal as well, so you can access all of that support and all of those emails.
And that brings us to the end. So if anybody has any additional question, that would be helpful. We have quite a few people today to answer any questions that you may have. I'll take that as a no then, because there's nothing on Slido. So that's the end of the webinar today. Just before you go, we ask that you provide us feedback, because it's very helpful to us to see what we're doing right and what we could do better. It's just a quick couple questions on feedback on today's event. Other than that, thank you all for attending, and we hope to see you soon.